One of the really interesting things about an idea is that an idea can give you a new idea. And then that new idea might give someone else another idea. Growing Ideas is a sculpture of a tree that actually isn't really a tree, is it? You start out by looking at this city, and it looks like a real city. And growing out of the park in the middle of town is this gigantic tree, a big old tree. And as you look up, you realize that the canopy is actually not a normal tree canopy, it's a cloud. And raining down from that cloud are all the crazy, funny little pieces that we love to build with. You know, as an artist, you always want to make your own sculptures, like things that come from within you. And I've been creating art with Lego bricks professionally for 10 or 15 years now, and so we've done so many different types of things. Huge sculptures of natural forms. We've done scale models of buildings and cars and cities and things. This sculpture was unique in that for my team to be able to help me to create this, they had to understand it the way I understand it. They had to know what it meant before it existed. That's something we've never had to do before.
This was something that really existed in the mind of Sean. For a period of time, it was sort of a pipe dream.
Just wow, such a huge team effort that everybody was absolutely necessary, a vital part of.
When I saw the design, I was excited. Until we start thinking about how.
I was thinking, yeah, why not? We can do it.
I think the germ of the idea came about in a couple different ways. I'm always really inspired by how we get ideas and how ideas can create new ones over and over and over again. And I knew I wanted to create something that was about this idea of inspiration and creativity, but I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. My studio is located in this historic neighborhood, and so we have big old buildings and big mature trees lining blocks. And I was walking by and I looked up at this big, beautiful old tree. I mean, the tree must be at least 150 years old. Somehow that's what gave me the idea of this tree that could water itself. I remember looking at it thinking, like, this is beautiful. I want to create this. And I had that idea, what if a tree could water itself? It would literally grow forever, and that's exactly like creativity. Creativity rains down upon itself and can grow forever. So I think when it came time to talk to my team about producing this sculpture, I tried my best to explain why I wanted to make this sculpture, and everyone had a lot of questions for a long time. We were at least 18 months into the development of this sculpture, and people were still having fundamental questions about how exactly I wanted this to look and what exactly it was supposed to mean. Everyone here at my studio is an artist, and so I rely on their skills and abilities to be able to sort of infuse into the work what we want from a basic idea. It would be wrong for me to talk about this sculpture and to not talk about Jeffrey, because if I was the guy that simply made a pencil drawing of this, Jeffrey was the person that figured out how to turn it into a sculpture.
I kind of got myself involved knowing that I would be a big part of building this thing and wanting to sort of make sure that it came together in the best way I could, you know, to sort of think about how the thing will come together. And I think for me, it became real when we taped up the silhouette on the wall, the size of the tree, and we stood next to it and could see where, you know, we existed.
Before that, it was just a lot of discussions, like, is this gonna work? Oh my gosh, is this gonna work? It was just you and Ji-sun and Haksel and Natsuki really like discussing this new idea and this new sculpture.
Haksel and Natsuki, they create our armatures for all of our sculptures, and they had a lot of things to say about how we could physically structure this on the inside to make it actually possible. Ji-sun took on the role of the lead visual designer, I think you could call it, coming up with how to actually turn this cloud shape that we've designed into a brick model that can actually physically be built. In the beginning, it was a lot of design and question marks and scratching of the head and pointing and gesturing. And so Ji-sun and Haksel and Natsuki and Jeffrey ended up doing a lot of work just trying to figure out how we could even make this thing. We knew this sculpture was going to be so big that we were worried about how heavy it was going to be. And we knew it needed to come apart in a few pieces so that we could transport it. One of the questions I remember Jeffrey asking me was, do you want to have fewer big chunks or more small chunks? In other words, if you're going to have a sculpture that's 1,000 pounds and it has to be broken up into 3 pieces, how are you going to lift those and move them around? And so we did some prototypes actually and tested it out to see like how can we make these chunks and put them together. And we realized that it was going to be much, much better to have a lot of small things that we could physically lift with our own 2 hands than have to worry about having huge, heavy things that you can't lift or that you need cranes for or forklifts for.
So, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is you would think after all this time working on this, I would know immediately how many pieces are in this thing. Little 3D pieces that were stuck together with blue tack just to kind of give us a sense of how it might come together and stay together.
This sculpture was unlike anything else because it was going to be so heavy that we didn't necessarily know how to even compute that. Somehow, and I don't know exactly how, Jeffrey figured out how to weigh it before it exists, and he somehow computed that it was going to weigh like a ton. And so for the first time ever, we actually brought a mechanical engineer on board to look at our drawings and try to figure out exactly how we would engineer this on the inside so that we could help hold this thing up and keep it safe.
Chris Pagano, I think you're just coming in and talking about trying to make sure that these things were strong enough that they could hold the weight, not cave in or break. And I also want to call out Haksel and Natsuki for doing a fantastic job for the armature.
Usually I think that everything is possible. She doesn't believe anything I do, and then I believe everything I do.
No, I have worked with him for years now. He's very optimistic, but like, oh, we can do it in a week, and actually it takes a month. We had a good balance that
Right.
he come out with good idea, and I keep questioning him. At the beginning, I was spending a lot of time designing the armature, designing calculation,
And communication.
and communicating, discussing with Sean, designers, builders.
Most of the time we just know what we have to do, and then it's not very complicated. When you have only one horizontal bar, it's easy, but when you're calculating with the many layers of horizontal bar, then sometimes it can be off. So this one had to be very accurate, because when you're putting different parts together later, if it doesn't fit, and then you cannot bring it back and fix it and then bring it back again.
We knew that we couldn't just make a giant welded strong thing that would be strong enough. We had to come up with a way that the components of the sculpture could interconnect but still be strong enough not to disconnect when we don't want them to. Everything that we create here in the studio is driven by the artistic purpose, and then it's our job to say, oh, it has to balance like that or float like magic, and so the technology makes the artwork happen. When I was first inspired to create a tree, looking at this old tree in my neighborhood, I thought, well, that's the kind of tree I want to make. I want to make a tree that feels old. How do you make a tree feel old, especially if you're making it with shiny plastic Lego pieces? We did a lot of experimentation with different types of bark. Sometimes the bark peels away and you're left with sort of the greens or different shades of tan, but we ended up simplifying it so that it just became a single color, and we added the moss to give that implication of old growth.
I like the outdoors, I like nature, so I had an absolute blast working on the tree trunk, just making an old, gnarly tree.
She really gave some great character to that trunk, and also figuring out a certain number of pieces.
Yeah, ordering all of those bricks. Actually deciding on a number, an insanely large number of bricks that we needed just to deal so many white bricks just to deal with the top of the cloud.
The design that we ended up with, where there are 20 some odd different chunks at the top of the cloud that have to get assembled, everybody was building. Everybody was building.
Gabe, Luis, Brett, Valerie, and David, sitting for hours and hours working on something that really was hard to see how it was all going to come together. It was kind of this grid of just white that came up with this very sort of complex, undulating, organic form on the outside, trying to stay aware for hours and hours and hours to make sure that was accurate. And we borrowed from Lego itself in terms of how to get them to sort of stick on one another, and having a variety of basically large bumps that come up that fit into holes in the pieces above them. There's pieces that overlap on top of the seams. I think the biggest piece is about 170 pounds, which takes multiple people to handle.
At the point that we started designing this sculpture, the largest creation we'd ever made was a sculpture of a life-size polar bear. And we would joke at the beginning of this project that we were literally making 2 polar bears in the sky balancing on a stick, because that's literally what it was. Even just staging that here in the studio, to set it all up and just look at it once, took an effort of literally everyone in the studio all lifting things and climbing on scaffolding and everything else just to get it all set together. I think we had about 12 people for about 2 hours just putting it together after it was already done.
Just wow, seeing it all, seeing you standing on top of it, putting all those cloud chunks together, and it staying up and floating and like defying gravity. It's just really impressive to finally see it going from blue tape on the wall to like being in the studio almost touching the ceiling. It was really amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I wanted the story of this sculpture to be sort of like, there's the city down there. It's the real city where all the people are living and doing their thing. And someone had an idea, and it was planted like a tree, like a seed in the city. Megan she actually put on her best urban planner hat and designed what this town was going to look like. Not only just, is there going to be a river? Is there going to be a suburb? Where is the road going to be?
City planning, after deciding, we wanted something that had a lot of life and vibrance to it, we decided to go with a city that was a middle scale. That way we had people that were walking around the city. They weren't super small, but they also weren't like minifig size. Deciding how we should divvy up the panels, like how it would be easiest. That way they were easy to actually get on the base, because it was a pretty large base, like 7 by 8 feet. 6 panels, one of which was permanently attached to the base, which is what the tree sat on.
I intentionally made the scale of that city tiny so that you could have that sense of proportion. Without the city down there, the tree looks like a tree, and if anything, looks like a small tree relative to our own physical size. And by putting that city down there, it gives you a sense of scale and perspective of how immense this thing really is. But what we imagined being a bustling metropolis had to turn into more of a small town.
We did want more than just a downtown scene. We wanted this to be a whole system that was working together. That way you get more of a broad idea of the life that's going on in this city.
We eventually created a zoning map and said, this is residential and this is mixed use with retail downstairs, and we made our own little lots the way you would if you were doing an urban plan and saying, this is all the lots that you're going to put buildings on, and then play developer and put houses here and offices there.
The trailer parks, there's a little graveyard, there's a farm, all these little things, this construction of the houses, abstracting and coalescing like all the details of a busy city and all the little things that make it feel lived into these little models.
If you bend down and really put your nose into this city and try to see what's going on down a side street, there's going to be something there. There might be somebody sitting on the front step, or somebody getting a parking ticket. There might be a guy riding his bike. There's a time-traveling silver car from the 1980s and a long white hearse out there to bust ghosts. I think there's a shark chasing a jet skier. Like, all that stuff is in there. Not because that's the point of the sculpture, but if you don't necessarily understand the idea that creativity inspires future creativity, that's okay. Maybe you can just love the city. Maybe you're very young and you don't know that kind of stuff yet. That's okay too. There's a reason that that city is right at your line of sight. I always want to make sure that when we create something, we put as much into it as we possibly can, so that the more you explore it, the more there is to see. I actually think that every time you make something, because you get experience doing that thing, you suddenly just already know that in the back of your head, and it then becomes part of something you do next. That's what's fascinating about creativity. All of the different things that I've done over the years have compiled into this piece. I think if I tried to do this sculpture 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible because I wouldn't have had the skills or the experience to have done it. You know, it's one thing to have an idea of something in your head, and then when it actually physically comes to be, it's always going to be different. But I am super excited with how it came out. It's better than I imagined, actually. Whenever we create something here at my studio, we want it to be more than simply a stack of pieces pressed together the right way. The last thing that I would hope a viewer of my work does is walk up and look at it and say, that's all made out of Lego. Neat, okay. And that goes back to one of the initial things that an idea can give you a new idea. And making this sculpture has given all of us a lot of neat ideas for things that we can do in the future and ways that we can make future work even better.
There's something really exciting about having pulled this off, and it empowers you a little bit to feel like, hey, we managed to pull something off that we didn't think we could, and what next? What's the next mountain to climb?